its private entities. With that, I would yield such time to the gentleman, to the chairman, as he may consume. Okay. Mr. Dix.
From Michigan is recognized.
Mr. Dix. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I just want to rise in strong support of this amendment. I appreciate Mr. Mulvaney working with the committee. This is a limiting amendment. I think it again is in response to making sure that the intent of the bill meets the language of the bill, and this is well done to continue to protect privacy and civil liberties of all Americans and still allow for the government to share malicious source code with the private sector. And I would yield back.
Yeah, I claim time in opposition to the amendment, although I do not oppose the amendment.
Without objection, gentlemen.
I also support this amendment. It's very important. It's another example of what we're attempting to do to protect the privacy and civil liberties of our citizens, but yet have a bill that we clearly need to protect them from a national security perspective. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from South Carolina.
I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from South Carolina. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to.
On that, we request for taking the ayes and nays.
Does the gentleman ask for a recorded vote?
I do.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from South Carolina will be postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 9, printed in House Report 112-454. For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona rise? The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 9, printed in House Report Number 112-454, offered by Mr. Flake of Arizona.
Pursuant to House Resolution 631, the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Flake, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Arizona.
I thank the chair. This amendment is straightforward. It would require the Inspector General of the intelligence community to include a list of federal agencies and departments receiving information shared with the government in the report already required by the underlying legislation. This act is an important piece of legislation that will help private entities and utilities protect themselves from catastrophic attacks to their networks by creating the authority for private entities and utilities to voluntarily share information pertaining to cyber attacks with the federal government and vice versa. H.R. 3523 avoids placing costly mandates on private industry and the creation of a new regulatory structure. That's what I really appreciate about this legislation, as I'm sure everyone does. It's voluntary. As with any new intelligence program, however, it's incumbent on us to make sure robust protections exist to safeguard privacy rights. The Inspector General report required under H.R. 3523 will provide a thorough review of the information shared under these new authorities and will address any impacts such sharing has on the privacy and civil liberties, adding a list of the departments and agencies that were recipients of this shared information, as my amendment would do, would add information on what government agencies exactly, which government agencies exactly are receiving shared information. Such information will further mitigate the risk of abuse to privacy rights and increase the effectiveness of the Inspector General's report. I commend my colleagues from Michigan and Maryland. They've been working hard to put together this bipartisan measure, working up until the very last minute to ensure that members' concerns are addressed. And I believe that this is an important piece of legislation. I'd like to yield to the gentleman from Michigan such time as he may consume.
Gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Thank you. I want to thank the gentleman from Arizona for working with us. This, again, was a negotiated amendment. The gentleman approached us with concerns to make sure that the IG report adequately reflected and allowed us to perform the adequate oversight. This amendment does that. I appreciate his work and effort, and I think this strengthens the bill and continues to provide the oversight and protection of civil liberties and privacy for all Americans. And yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. Does any member seek recognition in opposition?
No. No.
Gentleman from Arizona.
I just want to say I support the legislation, the underlying bill, and I would urge support for this amendment as well, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Arizona. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 10, printed in House Report 112-454. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 11, printed in House Report 112-454. For what purpose does the gentleman from Kansas rise?
Madam Chair, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 11, printed in House Report Number 112-454, offered by Mr. Pompeo of Kansas.
Pursuant to House Resolution 631, the gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Pompeo, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Kansas.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I appreciate this opportunity to offer a second amendment to this incredibly important piece of legislation that's been worked on for an awfully long time to balance the security needs of our nation and the privacy rights of every United States citizen. Similar to the first amendment I offered, this amendment addresses some of the concerns raised by me, privacy folks, civil libertarian advocates, to make very clear the intentions of this legislation. I talked earlier about the threat we face today. It's real, it's foreign, it's domestic. These cyber attacks are an enormous risk to our national security and to our economic security. And I now strongly support this legislation. I've had a chance to work with Chairman Rogers and the Ranking Member Ruppersberger to solidify limitations on this legislation that make it very clear that this government's use of this information will be limited. I think some have claimed incorrectly the current bill could be read to provide new authority to the federal government to install its Einstein system on private sector networks and to monitor traffic and send it back to the government with absolutely no limitations. That's wrong. This amendment, however, makes it even more clear. This amendment makes clear that nothing in this bill will alter existing authorities or provide any new authority to any entity to use a federal government-owned or operated cybersecurity system on a private sector system or network to present such a system or network. Again, I'm pleased to support the legislation. It doesn't create any new regulatory regime. It doesn't create any more federal bureaucracy and has no additional spending. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment and final passage of CISPA. That I reserve the balance of my time, Madam Chair.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. For what purpose is the gentleman from Michigan?
I yield whatever time the Chairman of the Intelligence Committee might consume.
Gentleman's recognized from Michigan.
Thank you. This is an important amendment, and again, I think alleviates some of the concerns. They were misguided, but this locks it down, makes it very tight, makes it very clear of the limiting of this information, which is the intent of this bill. So I think this bill, or this amendment, addresses the privacy and civil liberties advocates' claims that the liability protection in the bill with respect to the use of cybersecurity systems could be read to be broader than the activities authorized by the legislation. As I said, that was not true, certainly not the intent. This amendment makes that very clear in the bill that that would not be its purpose, and it is a limiting amendment, and I strongly support this amendment. It is a bipartisan amendment as well. And yield back my time.
Does any member seek recognition in opposition to the gentleman's amendment? Gentleman from Kansas.
Madam Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Kansas. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 12, printed in House Report 112-454. For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 12, printed in House Report Number 112-454, offered by Mr. Woodall of Georgia.
Pursuant to House Resolution 631, the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Woodall, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My amendment is a simple amendment. What we're doing here in this bill today, to the great credit of the chairman and the ranking member, is instituting a voluntary system by which our private companies and utilities can cooperate in the name of securing America's cyberspace. But what happens so often is when the federal government creates a so-called voluntary standard, suddenly those folks who choose not to play on that playing field are subject to new liabilities because they rejected that voluntary standard. Well, if it's going to be a truly voluntary standard, we have to ensure that those who reject it are not held to any new liabilities. I believe that was the intent of the committee as they crafted this legislation, but my amendment makes that clear to say that no new liabilities arise for any company that chooses not to participate in this new, truly voluntary cybersecurity cooperative regime. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Georgia reserves the balance of his time. Does any member seek recognition in opposition? Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With that, I want to thank the ranking member and the chairman for their tremendous openness throughout this entire process. Briefing after briefing, phone call after phone call, they've both made themselves available to members on both sides of the aisle so that we can get our questions answered in what is sometimes a difficult area to understand and digest. I thank them both for their leadership, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Georgia. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. In order to consider amendment number 13, printed in House Report 112-454. For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition?
To offer Amendment H.R. 35.
The clerk will
Amendment number 39.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 13, printed in House Report number 112-454, offered by Mr. Goodlatte of Virginia.
Pursuant to House Resolution 631, the gentleman for Virginia, Mr. Goodlatte, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Virginia.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I rise to offer an amendment to H.R. 3523. This amendment is the result of a series of long discussions between members of the bipartisan coalition supporting this bill and various privacy and civil liberties groups. As many know, I have long worked with these outside groups and with industry to make sure that where Congress acts with respect to technology, it does so in a way that is thoughtful, intelligent, and shows a strong respect for privacy and civil liberties. I'm a firm believer that Congress can craft legislation that addresses technology issues and allows the private sector to flourish while also protecting the rights of Americans. This amendment seeks to move the legislation further down that path. To do so, this amendment carefully narrows the definitions of the key terms in the bill: cyber threat information, cyber threat intelligence, cybersecurity purposes, and cybersecurity systems, and adds in 3 new definitions from the existing law. Together, these new definitions ensure that companies in the private sector can protect themselves against very real cyber threats. At the same time, they limit what information the private sector can identify, obtain, and share with others, and they do so in a way that is technology neutral, so that the definitions we write into law today do not become obsolete before the ink is dry. Specifically, these new definitions remove language from prior versions of the bill that could have been interpreted in broad ways. They remove or modify definitions that could have been thought to cover things that the bill did not intend to cover, like unauthorized access to a system or network that purely involves violations of a terms of service. These revised definitions also rely, in part, on existing law to cover the appropriate set of threats to networks and systems without being overly broad. I would note that these definitional changes are important on their own for the narrowing function they serve. In the view of groups like the Center for Democracy and Technology and the Constitution Project, this amendment represents, quote, important privacy improvement, end quote. Specifically, the change to the definitions addresses a number of key issues raised by a variety of groups and many in the Internet user community. As such, these amendments move an already important bill in an even better direction. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Does any member seek recognition in opposition to the gentleman's amendment? Gentleman from Maryland.
In opposition, but I do not oppose the amendment, and I yield
Without
2
objection.
minutes, 1 minute to Congressman Poe.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. Anytime the government gets involved in data sharing and data storage, there's going to be the possibility for abuse. I hear from my constituents in Texas and U.S. companies that they continue to lose information to cyber attacks from abroad. Most of these attacks come from none other than the organized crime syndicate of China, as I call it. They steal our intellectual property, and then they use the stolen information to compete against the United States. We need a common-sense information sharing system to combat the growing threat to this way of life that we have in America. However, we have to do it in such a way that protects our privacy and constitutional rights of citizens. While I believe the intent of the base bill was never to allow the government to use information it obtained for any other purposes than cybersecurity, I believe it is clear and simple language in Mr. Goodlatte's amendment is necessary to make it 100% clear that this is strictly prohibited. As we remember from the 2012 NDAA debate, it's important, especially when dealing with legislation that affects civil liberties and constitutional rights, Congress needs to be perfectly 100% clear. And I believe the Goodlatte Amendment does this. I urge all members to support it. I yield.
Gentleman from Virginia.
Madam Chairman, at this time I am pleased to yield 1 minute to the Chairman of the Intelligence Committee, the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Rogers.
Gentleman from Michigan is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank the distinguished former chairman and member, Mr. Goodlatte, for his common sense amendment. Again, this is working to make sure that this bill is restricted for both information use, privacy, and civil liberties, and why the coalition, I argue, continues to grow because of the good work of folks like Mr. Goodlatte. It's bipartisan in nature, and I would strongly urge the body's support for the Goodlatte Amendment. Yield back.
Gentleman from Virginia, yield back.
Madam Chairman, I am not aware of any other speakers on this amendment, so I would urge my colleagues to support the amendment. It is, as the chairman indicated and the ranking member indicated, bipartisan legislation that will improve the underlying bill in significant ways and protect the civil liberties of American citizens in a more clear fashion. I thank all of those in the chamber and outside who contributed ideas to help us craft this amendment, and urge all of my colleagues to support it and yield back the balance of my time. Gentleman yields back.
The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Virginia. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. What purpose does the gentleman from Michigan rise?
Madam Chair, I would ask for a recorded vote.
Does the gentleman have a motion?
Pursuant to Clause 6 on Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Virginia will be postponed.
Does she know it's coming? Yeah.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan rise?
Madam Chair, I move that the committee do now rise.
The question is on the motion that the committee rise. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the committee rises.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Speaker, the Committee on the Whole House on the State of the Union, having had under consideration H.R. 3523, directs me to report that it has come to no resolution thereon.
The Chair of the Committee of the Whole on the State of the Union reports that the committee has had under consideration H.R. 3523 and has come to no resolution thereon. For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan rise?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that during further consideration of H.R. 3523, pursuant to House Resolution 631, amendments number 10 and number 5 in the House Report 112-454 may be considered out of sequence.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered. Pursuant to House Resolution 631 and Rule 18, the Chair declares the House and the Committee of the Whole House in the State of the Union for further consideration of H.R. 3523. Will the gentlewoman from West Virginia, Ms. Capito, kindly resume the chair?
The House is in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for the further consideration of H.R. 3523, which the clerk will report by title.
A bill to provide for the sharing of certain cyber threat intelligence and cyber threat information between the intelligence community and cybersecurity entities and for other purposes.
When the Committee on the Whole rose earlier today, a request for a recorded vote on Amendment Number 13, printed in House Report 112-454 by the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Goodlatte, had been postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 14, printed in House Report 112-454. For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio rise?
Madam Chair, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 14, printed in House Report Number 112-454, offered by Mr. Turner of Ohio.
Pursuant to House Resolution 631, the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Turner, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Ohio.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This amendment would make a technical correction to the definition sections of this bill to ensure that U.S. cybersecurity policies remain consistent for protections against threats to our government and private sector networks. This amendment will maintain consistency among this bill and other cybersecurity policies. The terms, quote, deny, degrade, disrupt, or destroy are found throughout our national cybersecurity strategy and our guidance documents. The term deny was inadvertently omitted from H.R. 3523. Inserting deny makes the bill consistent with other national documents in the discussion of cybersecurity. The increase in cybersecurity incidences led to the development of centers like the Air Force's Cyberspace Technical Center of Excellence at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in my district in Dayton, Ohio. To combat this growing trend in the sophistication of cyber attacks, the Center of Technical Excellence has been turned to that focus. The need to protect U.S. networks from denial of service attacks was made clear when, for 3 weeks in 2007, Estonia was the target of a large-scale series of denial of service attacks against government websites, banks, universities, and Estonian newspapers. I urge all of my colleagues to support this amendment and the underlying bill. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman the gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to again thank Mr. Turner for this is an important clarification amendment and working with us to improve the status of the bill to make sure that we are able to protect America's networks and increases the ability for us to protect privacy and civil liberties. And I would appreciate the gentleman's good effort, and I would encourage the House to support the Turner Amendment.
Does any member seek recognition in opposition? Gentleman from Ohio.
Madam Chair, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Ohio yields back the balance of his time. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Ohio. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 15, printed in House Report 112-454. For what purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina seek recognition?
Madam Chairman.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 15, printed in House Report Number 112-454, offered by Mr. Mulvaney of South Carolina.
Pursuant to House Resolution 631, the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Mulvaney, and a member opposed shall each control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from South Carolina.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This amendment, ladies and gentlemen, is fairly simple and straightforward, but it bears discussion for a few moments. It requires the bill to expire of its own terms within 5 years. It's what we call in this business a sunset clause. And by its own terms, if the bill is passed, it will automatically cease to be enforceable after 5 years unless this body acts affirmatively to renew it. Generally, I think this is good policy with most things that we do in Washington, D.C. In fact, several people say that one of the biggest difficulties we have in this town is that we simply create laws all the time and they never go away. So generally speaking, I think sunset clauses are to be admired and to be encouraged. Even more so is the case, however, when we deal with situations where we have concerns regarding individual liberties. We've worked very, very hard to make this bill a good bill. It is an excellent bill. I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of this bill. But every single time that we start moving into the realm where the government action starts to bump up against individual liberties, it's a good idea to take a pause after a certain amount of time, in this case 5 years, and look over the actual implementation of the bill and make sure that we did exactly what we thought that we were going to do. Finally, I think in a case when we're dealing with technology, which moves so very rapidly, in fact, we've written this bill as well as we possibly could to try and deal with unanticipated developments in technology. But when you're dealing with technology that moves so rapidly and changes so quickly, we think it's important after a certain period of time, again here 5 years, to step back, look our hands over, and make sure that things worked exactly as we thought they would. So for that reason, Madam Chairman, I ask that this amendment be considered and be approved. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Does any member seek recognition in opposition to the member's amendment? The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from South Carolina. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The
Madam
amendment
Chairman.
is agreed to.
Madam Chair.
Gentleman from South Carolina.
On that, I ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from South Carolina will be postponed. In order to consider Amendment Number 5, for what purpose does the gentlewoman from Texas seek recognition?
Madam Chair, I have an amendment.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 5, printed in House Report Number 112-454, offered by Ms. Jackson Lee of Texas.
Pursuant to House Resolution 631, the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Texas.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Let me thank you for your courtesy. Let me thank the chairperson for his courtesy and the ranking member for his courtesy. I was very appreciative with the overlapping committee work for the courtesy of the floor. I thank you very much. Let me hold up the Constitution and say that I believe in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, particularly that protects us against unreasonable search and seizure. And I also recognize the bipartisan effort of this particular legislation and recognize that we may have disagreement. My amendment ensures that a comprehensive policies and procedures are implemented by the Department of Homeland Security to protect federal systems from cybersecurity threats and minimize the impact on privacy. What it does not do is allow Homeland Security and the Justice Department to spy on Americans. Let me be very clear. It does not allow the infrastructure of Homeland Security and the Justice Department to spy on Americans. I would not adhere to that. It is a shame that oversight of our nation's critical infrastructure, however, was not included in this bill. The hard work that has been done by the Committee of Homeland Security, Mr. Lungren and Ms. Clark, joined with other members, was worthy of consideration. I understand the strictures that we're dealing with. My amendment is designed to put in place comprehensive privacy protection in order to prevent any gross infringement of individuals' civil liberties or piracy rights. It allows the Department of Homeland Security to protect federal systems that enable air traffic controllers to operate. Madam Chairperson, we know the climate that we live in. God has blessed us, if I might even say that, but more importantly, the hard work of men and women who happen to be federal employees, that no action has occurred on our soil since 9/11. This amendment would allow the Department of Homeland Security to protect federal systems that enable air traffic controllers to operate, that enables Congress to operate, that enables all federal agencies to operate. My amendment is intentionally narrowly tailored to go after known or reasonable threats to our federal systems. Let me be very clear. This is not a reflection on this legislation from the extent of hard work. I am just saying that coming from my perspective, I would hope that we would look at infrastructure. I'm not advocating for the bill. I'm advocating for an open discussion on this issue, that certain elements have to be resolved dealing with cyber threats that we face. I've long been an advocate for protecting the right to privacy and the civil liberties of all Americans. That is very much a part of this amendment. But I'm also mindful of the importance of the infrastructure. As we assess cybersecurity measures and take steps to implement legislation, I believe we must ensure or be sure that to strike the proper balance between effective and strong security for our digital networks and protecting the privacy of individuals, as well as infrastructure that involves transportation. I am ever mindful that we must be careful not to go about not to go about strengthening cybersecurity at the expense of infringing on people's privacy rights and civil liberties, which is why my amendment is narrowly tailored and sets clear restrictions on the scope of communications addressed and why and how that information can be used. Our nation's critical infrastructures are composed of public and private institutions in the sectors of agriculture, food, water, public health, emergency services, government defense, industrial base, information and telecommunications, energy, transportation, banking and finance, chemicals and hazardous materials, and it is designed to do so. I ask my colleagues to support the amendment.
For what purpose the gentleman from Michigan rise?
I rise in opposition to the amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I would yield myself a minute and a half.
The gentleman is recognized for a minute and a half.
If you thought it was good for the businesses to require Facebook to give you their password, you'll love this. If not, you should go apoplectic. I think that's an awful practice on Facebook. This is worse. I want to read just from the law. Notwithstanding any other provision, it allows them to acquire, intercept, retain, use, and disclose communications and other system traffic that are transiting to and from the or stored on the federal systems, and to deploy countermeasures with regard to such communications and system traffic for cybersecurity purposes. This is dangerous. It's dangerous. For the very narrow bill that has been misrepresented from what we do, this is Big Brother on steroids. We cannot allow this to happen. This would be the government tracking communications, your medical records from the Veterans Association. It would track your IRS forms coming in and out of the federal government. This is exactly what scares people about trying to get into the business of making sure we protect our networks, but we can't do it by trampling privacy and civil liberties. This is awful. I'm just shocked that after all of this debate and all of this discussion on our very narrow bill, that my friends would come up with something that wholesale monitors the Internet and gets all of the information of which we fought so hard to protect on behalf of average Americans. And I would yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Georgia.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 2 minutes.
I want to thank the chairman for yielding. And let me say this to my colleague from Texas, that we have had a number of amendments here today that have tried to streamline this bill to make it even narrower and to take out any perception that it would be personal information and limit what government can do, and be very explicit in the terms of what this sharing is, that it's voluntary, that it's narrowly drawn. And the chairman and the ranking member have done a wonderful job of working with other members to allow these amendments to make this bill better. I'm very disappointed, and this amendment basically guts the bill. It expands it to where everybody that's been down here so far has been trying to narrow it in. This just expands it even more. This is the type of amendment that people fear, that we would give Homeland Security the ability to keep, intercept the transmissions. That is totally out of hand, and I just hope that we will vote against this amendment and support the underlying bill. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Gentlewoman from Texas.
I thank you very much. What an exaggeration. I know that they have been propelled by all of the media that has given them great support. Let me just say that they know that the bill, underlying bill, in fact, is considered an invasion of privacy. But if you look at my amendment, what it does is only when the communication is associated with known or reasonably respected or suspected cybersecurity threat. It is narrow, but more importantly, it has a privacy provision. I believe in privacy. Let me just say that I was not going to be denied the right to come to the floor to be able to frame what we should be doing, looking at infrastructure and the complement of making sure that privacy is protected. This particular book, even with the amendments they have, will not probably draw this to the point of acceptance. So I would argue that this is a productive debate, but the amendment that Jackson Lee has submitted does not, in fact, at all violate privacy. So I would say to them, I look forward to be able to address this question as we go forward, and I'm going to ask at this time unanimous consent to withdraw this amendment for the misinterpretation that my friends on the other side of the aisle have predicted or thought that they were going to put on this particular amendment. I thank the Speaker.
Is there objection to the gentlelady's request? Objection. The amendment is withdrawn.
I yield back. Thank you.
It is now in order to consider amendment number 10, printed in House Report 112-454. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California seek recognition?
Madam Chairwoman, I have an amendment at the desk. It's the Richardson Amendment number 10.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 10, printed in House Report number 112-454, offered by Mrs. Richardson of California.
Pursuant to House Resolution 631, the gentlewoman from California and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California.
I stand today in support of the Richardson Amendment to H.R. 3523, but I'd like to take a moment to thank the Majority Leader, Mr. Cantor, Chairman Rogers, and Ranking Member Ruppersberger for your tolerance in allowing us to come to the floor. I was ranking member of a committee that was in operation at this time, and thank you for allowing us to come forward. The Richardson Amendment ensures that owners and operators of critical infrastructure systems that are potential targets to cyber attacks receive information about cyber threats. Some examples of our critical infrastructure systems that this amendment would apply to are energy facilities, banking and finance facilities, chemical facilities, dams, nuclear plants, emergency services, agricultural and food systems, water treatment systems, many of these that would be in great danger and need information. Every single member of Congress has critical infrastructure sectors in their district, whether they be public or private, and every community in this nation has some critical infrastructure presence that should be protected and advised of threats. In my district, I have the Home Depot Athletic Center, which holds up to 27,000 people, the Boeing Corporation that manufactures the C-17 planes, the Long Beach Police and Fire Department EOC Center, the Long Beach Gas and Oil Department water treatment facilities. The numbers go on. But we need to make sure that not only ports and government facilities, but also private facilities are approved and entitled to have the same information. Some inherent complications are that there are 18 different federal government agencies that have jurisdiction over critical infrastructure sectors. For example, the Department of Homeland Security has jurisdiction over chemical, commercial facilities, dams, emergency services, and nuclear power alone. H.R. 3523, as currently drafted, does not mention how critical infrastructure sectors that do not fall within the jurisdiction of government intelligence agencies would receive critical cyber threat information or have the systems in place to share information appropriately. This amendment makes an important improvement to that legislation. I'd like to commend Chairman Rogers and Ranking Member Ruppersberger, who mentioned in their testimony before the Rules Committee and the Intelligence Committee that there was a key fault here in this critical infrastructure section. I'm further pleased that the Rules Committee acknowledged that by finding this amendment in order and urge my colleagues to consider this seriously. While Chairman Lungren's original cyber bill did not make it to the House floor, I offer this Richardson Amendment in the same bipartisan spirit that I did when his bill was brought forward in our subcommittee. Mr. Lungren and Mr. Langevin spoke earlier on the bipartisan amendment regarding critical infrastructure, and that is hence me building my comments on that. The Richardson Amendment number 10 ensures that our critical infrastructure sectors will not be left out by receiving information that could protect their systems against a terrorist attack. This amendment makes sure that industries most at risk of a cyber attack receive information that they need to protect the public and the facilities at large. My amendment makes explicit that critical infrastructure sectors be included in information sharing relationships and does not include any new federal authorities. With that, Madam Chairwoman, I urge my colleagues to support this amendment number 10.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
Madam Chair, I rise in opposition to the amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I appreciate the gentle lady's effort. Again, we were pretty careful in this year-long process of trying to find a very narrow solution because of all of the challenges that come with trying to get a piece of legislation across the House to the Senate to the President's desk. I argue that the Homeland Security Committee should engage in a critical infrastructure debate. Here's the problem. It's not defined for the purposes of this bill, so we don't know what that means. We've been very careful to separate the government from the private sector. There is no government involvement in the private sector networks. It's just information, malicious source code sharing. That's it. This, we're not sure where it goes. Many in industry believe that they're talking about the backbone of the Internet. Are they talking about the backbone of the Internet? We don't know. It's not well defined. That would mean then that the government, for the first time, gets into the backbone of the Internet. I think that's a horrible idea. A terrible idea. So I don't think that's what the gentlelady intends, but the problem is that's not what the language says. So I encourage the gentlelady. I look forward to working with her as she works through those issues on Homeland Security, because these are hard. They're tricky. Sometimes a word can get you in trouble, and as we have found along the path here. And as it should, we should be really careful about how we're doing this. So I'd encourage the gentlelady to work with us. We'll provide, I know Mr. Ruppersberger, since we've been through this, we can provide some help along the way, and we look forward to the product that you all work on that is geared toward the infrastructure piece. Again, this was never intended to solve all the problems. It was intended to be a very narrow first step to say, hey, if your house is being robbed, we want to tell you before the robber gets there. That's all this bill does. It tells if your computer is going to get hacked and your personal information stolen, we want you to have the malicious code so you can protect yourself. That's all this bill does. And so we think that we get a little nervous when it starts crossing that divide that we've established between the government and the private sector. We don't want you start crossing that divide. We think you can get in some serious trouble in a hurry without very clearly defined language and definition. So I would encourage, unfortunately I'll have to oppose the amendment, but I look forward to working with the gentlelady in a very important issue, infrastructure protection, as the Homeland Security does its work. And I would reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentlewoman.
Yes, I claim time in opposition to the amendment, although I do not oppose the amendment.
Time in opposition has been claimed. Does the gentleman from Michigan yield time
yield
to the
me.
gentleman from Maryland?
I would yield such time as Mr. Ruppersberger would consume.
In opposition. Gentleman's recognized.
As we said before, our bill is extremely limited, and we're attempting again to allow our government, our intelligence community, to give the information that is necessary to protect our citizens from these cyber attacks. Ours is the most active bill that is out there now. Our bill hopefully will pass and go to the Senate, and there will be a lot more negotiation. But there's a lot of work to do in other areas too, such as Homeland Security, and I know there are some issues involved in the Homeland Security markup. I know that there are issues involving judiciary. And I can say this, I know that the Chairman and I, for 1 year now, have worked very openly with every group that we think would be involved in this bill. And because of different positions taken, including ACLU and other positions, we listened, this bill was better, and we hope that it passes. So we clearly will work with you, but we on the Intelligence Committee are very limited to our jurisdiction. And that's why a lot of these issues we can't deal with other than what is in our bill right now. Now, Madam Chairman, I have one more speaker that's on his way for the bill. What? He's not coming? Okay, then I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlewoman from California.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Again, I'd like to thank both the Chairman and the Ranking Member and look forward to the opportunity to work with you. I would just give you one analogy to consider as we move forward. As you recall in 9/11, when the planes hit those two twin towers, the government had the ability to notify the private airlines to scramble the planes and to demand that all of the planes would be landed because we didn't know where they were going to go. At that point, the government had the ability to work with the private sector, with the airline industry, to communicate information that they were now becoming aware of. I'm certainly not suggesting that we interfere with the free-flowing ideas of the Internet. What this amendment is suggesting, and I look forward to working with you in the future, is that the government does have the ability, if in the event something happens with dropping some chemicals into water, for example, treatment facilities, that the government should certainly have the ability to work with those private sector companies to be able to notify them and ensure that the public is protected. But I thank you for hearing the amendment, and I look forward to working with you going forward.
Gentlewoman, yield back the balance of her time. from Michigan.
Just thank the gentlelady, and I look forward to that opportunity and yield back the remainder of my
Gentleman
time.
yields back. Gentleman yields back the balance of her time. Yes. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from California. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, proceedings will now resume on those amendments printed in House Report 112-454, in which further proceedings were postponed in the following order. Amendment number 1 by Mr. Langevin of Rhode Island. Amendment number 4 by Mr. Rogers of Michigan. Amendment number 6 by Mr. Quayle of Arizona. Amendment number 7 by Mr. Amash of Michigan. Amendment number 8 by Mr. Mulvaney of South Carolina. Amendment number 13 by Mr. Goodlatte of Virginia. Amendment number 15 by Mr. Mulvaney of South Carolina. The chair will reduce to 2 minutes the minimum time for any electronic vote after the first vote in this series. The unfinished business is the request for recorded vote on amendment number 1 printed in House Report 112-454 by the gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Langevin, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 1, printed in House Report number 112-454, offered by Mr. Langevin of Rhode Island.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote shall rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 15-minute vote.
A series of votes now on amendments to the cybersecurity bill leading up to a final passage vote on that legislation that promotes information sharing between the federal government and businesses. This amendment would expand eligibility to participate in the voluntary information sharing program created in the bill to include critical infrastructure owners and operators. Here's a Capitol Hill reporter for an overview on the bill.
Tim Starks writes for Congressional Quarterly. Well, with the House working on cybersecurity legislation today, we have the White House last evening issuing a threat to veto. What are the administration's concerns?
Well, the administration has two major concerns. One, they think the bill doesn't do enough as it pertains to protecting the most important computer networks that are owned by businesses. Things like the electricity grid and the railroad control system. Those are things that this bill doesn't impose any new regulations or any new standards on. This bill is strictly focused on information sharing, and it leaves that part out that the administration thinks is essential. The second part is related to whether they think it adequately protects the personal data of information that the businesses would share with the federal government as part of what the idea of the bill is, to exchange information about threats. They don't think that, for instance, it does enough to protect. It's something called minimization. They don't have enough of that in the bill, which would make sure that any data that goes from the businesses to the federal government, that the personal data related to the people that is shared is not is as extensively shared as it would be if they just handed the data over wholesale.
What's the aim of the bill being brought today by House Intelligence Committee Chair Mike Rogers?
Well, his aim is to make sure that the businesses that own these networks that might be attacked by hackers or spies or worst case scenario nation states, that those businesses get information from the federal government. Right now, a lot of that data is classified. There would be a procedure in this bill that would allow these businesses to have temporary or permanent security clearances. So they would be able to receive the threat information that the federal government gets under that procedure. And the other thing it would do is make it so that there would be incentives for the business groups to voluntarily share the threat information that they're seeing on their end. So by, for instance, giving them some legal protections related to privacy laws and for any information that they exchange, and making sure that they aren't subject to a bunch of lawsuits.
Who's opposed to that legislation, and what are their concerns?
Well, the administration starts. There's some House Democrats that are opposed to the bill. Some of their objections are similar to some of the major groups outside of the Capitol Hill that are opposed to it. They share some of the administration's concerns about how much information is shared, how it is shared from the standpoint of privacy and civil liberties. Particularly, one of the things that this bill doesn't do that some of those groups would have wanted to see is make sure that no information goes directly to the hands of the National Security Agency or other military agencies because of historical wrongs that have been related to the NSA, and other spy agencies having track records that aren't considered very positive when it comes to, protecting the privacy of individuals in the United States.
Any amendments in the spotlight that you're watching today?
Well, there are a few amendments that are actually backed by the committee and the sponsors because they have been trying to ease these concerns about the privacy, situation, the privacy concerns that people have about their bill. So some of those are amendments that will help go a ways toward easing some concerns, although not some of the ones that I just mentioned about that are left unaddressed about NSA and who receives the data. So some of the things that limit the purposes, for instance, for which the government could receive the cybersecurity data, those are important amendments toward long-term support of the bill. The other amendments there are some other amendments out there that are not considered as favorable by the sponsors. Things like sunsets that would expire the bill in 5 years. Things that would even further narrow the scope of the purposes of the information that can be used. There are a few like that will probably have trouble getting enough passage, but there's also a sense some of these bills have been sponsored by some of these amendments have been co-sponsored by Republicans. So we'll see how that plays out, whether they'll actually have enough votes to narrow the bill further than the sponsors want it to be narrowed.
Now, in one of your stories earlier this week, you highlight the lobbying effort behind this legislation. Who are some of the key players, quickly?
Well, business groups are very influential on this. The whole issue of the anti-piracy bills that were controversial a few months back, SOPA and PIPA, those two bills, those bills were opposed not only by privacy advocates but also by technology companies. This bill is sponsored not only by the major business groups like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, but it's not sponsored but endorsed by. It's also supported by some of those technology groups, your Facebooks, those kinds of companies that had an earlier role in defeating SOPA and PIPA. So they're influential on the side in making sure that it gets through, and then on the other side of people who are opponents are the privacy groups.
A lot to be said about this legislation. Tim Starks is a staff writer for Congressional Quarterly. We appreciate your time today.
Thanks for having me.
As we heard in the interview, the Obama administration opposes the bill and has threatened a veto. A statement from the White House says it fails to ensure that the nation's core critical infrastructure is protected while repealing important provisions of electronic surveillance law without instituting corresponding privacy, confidentiality, and civil liberties safeguards. 6 more amendment votes after this one. Some of our live coverage tomorrow on C-SPAN 3. A House Ways and Means Subcommittee looks at changing the Medicare program. That's at 9 a.m. Eastern. And President Obama will give a speech at Fort Stewart, Georgia, and that'll be live at 12:35 p.m. on C-SPAN 3. As this vote continues, here's a story about one of the events we covered today here on C-SPAN. Representative Paul Ryan of Wisconsin said today that his Catholic faith guided the budget he authored for the Republican Party. Mr. Ryan delivered the Whittington Lecture at Georgetown University, a Jesuit school, where CBS News writes 90 priests and members of the faculty sent him a letter yesterday accusing him of authoring a budget that, quote, decimates food programs for struggling families, radically weakens protections for the elderly and the sick, and gives more tax breaks to the wealthiest few. We'll have Budget Committee Chairman Ryan's speech after the House is out here on C-SPAN. The House is voting on an amendment to the cybersecurity bill. The Associated Press writes that the bill is designed to address the cybersecurity threat by getting the private sector and government to share information to thwart attacks of foreign governments, terrorists, and cyber criminals. Although the information sharing is voluntary, civil liberties groups fear the measure could lead to government spying on Americans. Tomorrow, the House will debate a bill that would prevent student loan interest rates from doubling on July 1st from 3.4% to 6.8%. The Hill writes that House Speaker John Boehner today called on President Obama's campaign to reimburse taxpayers for the cost of a campaign-style trip to battleground states, where he talked about the student loan rates. At his briefing today, which you can see at cspan.org, Speaker Boehner said, quote, "This week, the president traveled across the country on taxpayers' dime at a cost of $179,000 an hour, insisting the Congress fix a problem that we're already working on. Frankly, I think this is beneath the dignity of the White House." That a quote from Speaker Boehner. President Obama traveled to college campuses in North Carolina, Iowa, and Colorado. You can see those rallies with the president also at our website, cspan.org.
vote. The yeas are 167. The nays are 243. The amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business is the request for a recorded vote on Amendment Number 4, printed in the House Report 112-454 by the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Rogers, on which further proceedings were postponed, on which the ayes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment Number 4, printed in House Report Number 112-454, offered by Mr. Rogers of Michigan.
A recorded vote has been requested.